Disclaimer, this show is for educational purposes only and is not an alternative for clinical counseling. Please seek a mental health professional for your specific needs.
Welcome back to Intake Talk Show with your host, Bertha F. Barrett, licensed mental health counselor. Today's guest is Janelle Carrington, licensed clinical social worker and Reiki master. Today's topic, boundaries. Your Intake podcast starts now.
Hello, and welcome back to Intake Talk Show, where it's time to shine the light from a mental health perspective. If this is your first time watching or you're returning and you haven't subscribed, please hit that subscribe button to support what we're doing. We're bringing mental health to the forefront of the world's mind so that we can see it differently and so that we can better understand how everything, and I mean absolutely everything that we do in this beautiful life that we have affects us in some way or the other. Now, today's topic is boundaries. That's right, boundaries. That word that most people tend to fear. Okay. But I have a special guest with me and she's going to help me discuss this topic with boundaries. So let me introduce her now. Janelle Carrington is a licensed clinical social worker and Reiki master dedicated to helping people navigate life's challenges with clarity, compassion, and intention. Through her practice, she combines therapy and energy healing to support emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. Janelle creates safe, reflective spaces where clients can explore grief, release old patterns, and reconnect with their inner strength. With a blend of professional expertise and intuitive guidance, she empowers others to cultivate resilience, self-awareness, and a deeper sense of wholeness. Welcome to the show, Janelle.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited for you to be here and discuss this topic with me. Indeed.
Yes, for sure.
Is there anything else you'd like for the viewers and listeners to know about you?
I feel like you covered it. I'm licensed clinical social worker and Reiki master, and then my practice is alchemy therapy and holistic wellness space.
I love it. Okay. So, Janelle, today's topic is boundaries. And I'm sure as a social worker, you know, you're in private practice, how difficult this topic can be. And all the stigmas around boundaries itself.
Nope, there are a lot out there.
Yes, they are. So let's start with what does setting boundaries really mean? And why do so many people struggle with it?
Yeah, so boundaries is being able to express our needs, limits, and expectations in a relationship. And one of the reasons that it can be very difficult is sometimes people aren't really sure what their boundaries are, or they're worried that expressing a boundary could lead into the ending of a relationship or could jeopardize it in some way. Maybe it can cause a conflict. So we're a little bit more likely to maybe back off and try other ways to deal with setting boundaries.
Okay. I love the way that you define that. I usually tell people, what boundaries do is it protects their time, their energy, their emotions, their sense of self, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it creates this atmosphere so that others can know what is acceptable, what isn't acceptable, right?
Right.
And how they want to be treated. Okay. But it's important to understand too, because many times what I hear is that people have a lot of guilt around setting boundaries.
Mhm.
They have a lot of fears around setting boundaries. And those fears look like, okay, people are going to think I'm mean.
Mhm.
I don't like conflict, all of those,
Yeah.
And so many times due to those fears, people, attempt to avoid boundaries,
Mhm.
setting boundaries. But in doing so, what I end up seeing is a lot of resentment, okay, toward people, a lot of stress, feeling drained, okay, feeling invisible
Yes.
oftentimes because they struggle with setting those boundaries. And that's key. And then when I say what I see that in my family. I see that with friends. I see it so many places. And just the idea of bringing up boundaries almost kind of make people go, no,
Mhm. Mhm.
but they're essential and we need them.
Yeah, they're so important to have healthy relationships. And if we're going to get our needs met, for people to be able to show up for us in the way that we're desiring, we have to be able to communicate what our boundaries are. A lot of times people feel that they should just know. They should just know they should have, told me they couldn't call me back. They should have known that I was going to find that rude. But the reality is, all of us have different, types of boundaries. Not everybody will navigate the same in certain situations. So you can't just assume somebody's going to know and then hold this resentment and anger against them when maybe they didn't even know they crossed your boundary to begin with.
I like that you said that because
Hmm.
that's about expectations.
Hmm.
Strangely enough, I just had this conversation with a friend of mine yesterday, and I was telling her how unfair it is to expect anything from someone without their permission. It's
Hmm.
like there's this invisible law of expectations floating around. Nobody's communicating. It's just
Yeah.
that, well, they've known me long enough, so they
Hmm.
should know. I expect them to know. I
Hmm.
expect them to know how I feel and what I like and what I don't
Hmm.
like. And the reality is they don't know. Regardless of how long someone has been in your life, no one really knows you as well as you do,
That is true.
right?
Yeah.
And we're all struggling with knowing ourselves and dealing with our own emotions, thoughts, and feelings.
Mhm.
And so oftentimes you have to open a space to communicate with people to even help them understand or even accept, acknowledge, whatever word you want to use, your boundaries, your expectations. So I'm glad that you brought that up because that happens a lot.
Yeah.
People are expecting.
There are a lot of unspoken expectations that are floating around and causing resentment in relationships. And even if you know your boundaries, the other person may not know them. Also, I can definitely say, as I've, grown and maybe gotten older, some things that maybe I would have been a little bit more comfortable with have changed. So instead of
Mhm.
assuming somebody else, they've known me for such a long time, they should know that. But maybe I'm a different person in this relationship as it's gone on. Maybe my boundaries of things that I've been okay with have changed. So it's not up to them to just figure it out or just put the pieces together. I have to almost reintroduce myself and my boundaries at times to say, you know what? I know we've had this type of arrangement, but this doesn't really work for me anymore like it used to.
Yeah, yeah. I'm
Mhm.
glad yeah, definitely key. This doesn't work for me anymore the way that it used to. That
Mhm.
brings up so many different things I want to ask you, right?
Yeah.
People literally, sometimes people feel like, okay, because I've been in this relationship and I understand that we live a life of relationships. Because I've been in this relationship for so long, I think it's too late now to set a boundary. When in
Mhm.
fact, it isn't. It
Oh,
is never too late to tell people what it is that, you need from them. You need them to respect. You need them to acknowledge. It is never too late. You can be in a relationship for 20 something years, and it's okay to start setting those boundaries.
it most certainly is. And I think the most healthy relationships definitely are always having those conversations around boundaries. Like, hey, how are you
Mhm.
feeling about the relationship? What's going on for you? Is there something I could be doing more or less of? Are there things that are happening that you don't like? How can we make sure this is a, healthy and safe space for the both of us? Because you're right, who I was 10 years ago isn't who I am now, and it's not going to be who I am in 10 years from now, I'm sure. I'm sure my boundaries will be moving along as I continue to evolve with the person. And a lot of us are like that. We evolve as people, we have different experiences. So our boundaries may change and there may not be as obvious to other people as it is to ourselves.
Exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. I love that. Thank you for saying that. That is so needed. People need to hear that, really,
Yeah.
because this is really a topic that people struggle with often. Now let's just move a little bit further and talk about the different types of boundaries,
Yes.
right? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so there are different types of boundaries, whether I'm thinking about, maybe digital boundaries, emotional boundaries, financial boundaries, physical boundaries. So we can look at that in all of our relationships, that it's not just the word boundary is general. Like, yes, we want to set boundaries, but it may look different in every relationship, whether it's at work, a romantic relationship, a friendship. There are multiple boundaries, types of boundaries, I'll say, that are at play.
Love that. Okay.
Mhm.
And we also want to remember too self boundaries, right? And I
Yeah.
usually tell people for every boundary you set for a person, You need to set one for yourself
That's
because what we don't always realize is how we cross our own boundaries.
yes, girl. That's a word right there.
And so it's key that, we set boundaries for ourselves
Mhm,
because often we set these boundaries and we get, and we become upset with other people for not
mhm.
respecting them. And just because, let me give this disclaimer, please. Just because you set a boundary doesn't mean that everybody's going to respect the boundary.
Yes.
That's key. But you set the boundary, and when you notice that someone isn't respecting that boundary, then you reinforce.
Yes.
You repeat it again. And it's up to you how many times you want to repeat that thing before you say, okay, there's a consequence here now.
Exactly. Nope, that's so true. We have this idea right now that if I say like this is my boundary and you can't cross it, that should automatically, change someone else's behavior. And if they don't change, then we get frustrated and say, well, I don't understand. Why aren't they listening to me? And sometimes we have to take a step back and say, well, why am I not listening to myself? I've already
Mhm.
communicated that I didn't like this boundary being crossed, and my presence, continued presence in this relationship says that I am okay with it, that it's not
Yeah.
serious, that it's not really a boundary, it's a suggestion if there is no consequence.
Mhm.
So if we're continuing to say I have a boundary, then be prepared to uphold it even if somebody else doesn't.
Right, right.
Mhm,
And it's important too because this is what I hear. Well, if people are not respecting my boundaries, what I'm supposed to do, just cut everybody off? I'm going to
mhm,
be so alone.
mhm,
I don't ask anybody to cut anybody off. I don't say you have to cut anybody off, but you should have some consequences behind this
mhm.
idea of boundaries. Okay, because some people are too enmeshed in your life. That can be family too. Oh
Yeah.
God, that can be family too. Yes.
Mhm.
And so you have to create those boundaries and be able to clearly communicate that, listen, I understand that you feel like you need to do this in my life. And maybe that's how you want other people to operate in your life. But as far as for me, I don't care to operate that way.
Mm,
If they don't respect that, then you have to decide, okay, then what is the consequence? It's just consequence. It's not like you're disciplining people by the way of punishing them. But the
yeah.
consequences can look something like, okay, well, since you can't, respect my boundaries, maybe we don't need to see each other as often.
Mhm.
Because I don't want you to, I don't want to become upset or resentful towards you because
Yeah.
you just refuse.
Mhm.
And so that's the thing. But Janelle, this is what I want to ask you. If you're married
Okay.
and that spouse isn't respecting that boundary, sometimes you can't get away from them.
Yeah. No, you can't just say I'm done with this.
And so that's the thing that, you have to look at and how do you handle that even with a spouse?
Mm,
Sometimes it's all the time. It's about sitting down and communicating and saying, okay, I see that, you are not respecting this boundary that I set in our marriage.
mhm.
Okay. And unless you, are able to accept
Yeah.
that this is not healthy for our relationship. Because boundaries are not just individualized.
Yeah.
They're really about the collective
Mm,
relationship.
mhm,
I'm not only trying to make sure that I'm okay, but I want to make sure you're okay too,
mhm.
right?
Yeah.
Because I'm giving you a space to create a boundary. But
Mm,
I'm also giving you some acknowledgement where if you don't respect this boundary,
mhm.
eventually, because I'm human, you know,
Exactly.
yeah, eventually I'm gonna get upset, right?
For
And then
sure.
if I get upset, then this is a whole nother issue.
Mhm, mhm.
And so I think people need to understand that. So give me your thoughts on how we can, reinforce these boundaries in those closer relationships like marriage,
Mhm,
like family members. Oh God, with family members. Give me some examples that someone can reinforce these boundaries and
mhm.
not feel like they have to cut everybody else because that out. That's because that's not what we're asking for.
Yeah. Part of healthy relationships is also knowing how to, of course, communicate, but also repair. That's what's going to create something long lasting. So, in those relationships where you feel like, okay, my boundary is consistently being crossed, Maybe it's time to really have a deeper conversation and pull our partner or our family member in and give some insight. And it's not that you are, explaining or justifying like why the boundary should exist, but it's giving them a kind of peek into your own emotional world to say, this is why I'm asking for this from you. It makes me
Mhm.
feel this way. And it's not really, maybe it's not sustainable for me any longer. So I like to tell people using I statements because when we start blaming other people and making them responsible for our emotions, we can get into very, rocky territory. But letting them know, hey, this makes me feel like this, and this is not going to work for me. Where can we find the compromise? Is there a compromise that can exist there with the boundary that we're trying to implement?
Okay. So how do you handle it when someone says, because I know some people are going to ask this, how do you handle it when you have set the boundary and someone just refused to? Like you've communicated in every way possible and someone just refused to,
Mm-hmm.
abide by those boundaries. What do you
Mhm.
do?
It's okay to take a break from relationships. I feel like everybody jumps to, like, I'm just going to cut this person off, but
Yeah.
maybe we need a break. Maybe we need some
Mhm.
time apart. I need to really sit and think about what my next steps are going to be or how I want to move forward in this relationship. Maybe that space is needed. Maybe we then can come back and have a conversation, or maybe we decide, hey, I don't think this relationship can continue anymore. So don't be afraid to take a break, take a step back and say, all right, this is not working for me right now. And I don't have to
Mhm.
decide in the moment what I'm going to do about the relationship. I can just press pause.
Yeah, I love that you said that. Take a break, okay?
Mhm.
Sometimes we need those breaks. And sometimes we can set, I'm gonna be honest with you, because I've learned how to even set some silent boundaries
Mm,
just by my behavior. And I often have to do that. You can see I'm big on family.
I love
I
it.
love mine. Yes, I love mine and I
Mhm.
love family.
Mhm.
But I realized that because as first of all, as this beautiful brown skinned woman in our culture, is so enmeshed, right?
Yeah.
And so boundaries almost become like a curse word.
I understand.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so sometimes family can just feel like they can come in and do whatever they want to because they're family.
Mhm.
And you can't divorce me because I'm your family. I'm still gonna be your
Exactly.
family. Yes, you're
Exactly.
still gonna be my family. Of course you are. And I'm not trying to divorce you, but I don't have to answer that phone either when you call.
That part. Yes. No, it's
Okay.
so true.
Thank you. And I think this is key to point out. I know as human beings, specifically as women, we were not clearly taught how to focus on self.
Mhm.
Okay. And I don't just mean this selfish focus. We were taught to focus on everybody outside of ourselves.
Yes.
And because of that, it has kind of burned out a lot of women, okay, in
Mhm.
relationships, friendships, all of that, because you're trying to give so much of self.
Yeah.
And you never ever replenish, give back to self. And each time you try to give back to self, you almost feel like you're selfish. You're wrong for doing it, you
Mhm.
know? And so when we talk about setting these boundaries and taking a break, you have to understand it's okay to break for your own self.
Yeah.
You have to break and pause. And sometimes if that means not picking up that call with that friend who
Mhm.
always want to talk about her stuff
Always.
before she can even ask you how you doing. She's like, girl, let me tell you. And
Yeah.
before she's gone down the line for a
Mhm.
whole 30 minutes
Mhm.
and you sitting on the phone. Then after she finishes, she goes, well, anyway, how are you? And I'm
Mhm.
like, really?
Yeah.
A
So
whole 30 minutes? Well, I'm good. I don't even want to talk about my family now. My family is well.
yes.
It was good talking to you, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And that doesn't mean that you have to walk away from the friend,
No.
of course,
Mhm.
but taking a break, specifically if you've communicated with that friend that, listen, it would be nice sometimes if you just called and said, hey, how you doing? Let us just have a conversation
Mhm.
instead of just calling, trying to dump all of this stuff on me. And
Mhm.
then after you dump, then you want to say, well, how are you doing? After all of that, I don't
Yeah.
even want to tell you how I do.
Exactly. I'm tired now. I don't listen to everything that you had to say. I was doing okay, but now it's changed now that I've listened to this conversation.
Exactly. Learning how to take some time, some space away from people and
Mhm.
not feeling guilty for that. That's key. And in marriages, a space can be difficult. Taking space can be difficult.
Mhm.
If people are struggling in marriages with boundaries, I always say, listen, if you got to go seek some marriage counseling, do it.
Mhm.
Sometimes involving that third party just to help your spouse to see, okay, why it's so important that these boundaries are there.
Mhm. Mhm.
Then I say do it because again, if you don't, I've been living long enough to know that if you don't, resentment will.
It does. And it's really sneaky too, because it's one infraction after another that kind of comes up until it hits a point where if you do seek help, then you feel so angry and upset. And it's not
Mhm,
because somebody didn't load the dishwasher. It's not because of that. It's because of so many things that have happened over the course of the relationship for years that now is all coming up. But sometimes we can't remember it. We just know we have felt unheard and we know we're angry and we know we want to be, that anger wants to be seen.
yeah, I agree. I'm glad that you went there because now I want to talk to you about, what are the signs that boundaries are being crossed?
Mhm. Good one.
Even, subtle ways. What are the boundaries?
Yeah. I think some of the subtle signs that a boundary is being crossed is one of the first things we do is we feel it. It feels off in our bodies when something happens. And even if it's not a huge reaction, we kind of give a little bit of a side eye like, did they do that? And I didn't like that. I didn't like how that felt. Sometimes if we say no, it may feel like we have to justify our no, like they won't accept our no unless we give them a solid reason, a true reason. Another way a boundary could be crossed is if someone maybe make light about a boundary, like, oh, I know you and your boundaries. You may not like that, but I want you to do this. So paying attention to when there's a joke around our boundaries being expressed, when we're saying no, when we feel like we have to change our response to someone. Those are ways that we can tell our behavior is slightly adjusting to the person because we feel like they won't respect our boundary.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay. I like that. I like too that you brought up that physical aspect because most people don't understand that there are some, physiological responses when you feel like somebody has crossed your boundaries. There really is. And sometimes that looks like, as soon as you get around a person, you just get irritable, like,
Yeah.
right? You know,
Mhm.
y- Something in your body just feel tense, like you just
Yep.
feel tension all in your body. That's a
Mhm.
good sign. Okay, that's
Yeah.
a good sign that, your boundaries are being crossed. Um, Even after communicating in those boundaries, they're not being respected.
Yep.
We have this, saying that they used to have this saying that says, don't tolerate, appreciate.
Mhm.
And I think so often people tolerate relationships.
Yeah.
They just tolerate them instead of really appreciating them. And they tolerate them because of this fear of communicating
Mhm.
that, listen, we've done this long enough. This no longer works for me. Okay. This is a problem for me. Whatever that is, setting those boundaries without guilt, without shame.
Mhm.
And that's key because when we don't do that, all we're doing is harming ourselves.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, if you're a people pleaser or if you're someone who has experienced trauma around boundaries, it can feel like the safest option. So I can absorb, this hurt, this pain, this insert word better than I can communicate how I'm feeling. Because if I communicate, it could turn into a situation where maybe I'm abandoned, maybe I'm rejected, maybe I'm made fun of, maybe I escalate a conflict. So let me just tolerate and find other ways to get my behavior out or get my feelings out instead of addressing this person directly.
Right, right. Oh, I want to go in another direction with that. Because yeah, because no, really, because sometimes in tolerating
Mm.
that can open up a door for so much.
Yeah.
Now we're talking about abuse, so many things. I don't think people understand why it's so important to create these boundaries.
Yeah.
Okay, if nothing else, if you can't create them with other people, it's imperative that you learn how to create self boundaries.
Yeah.
So knowing when to tell self to stop. Girl, don't go there.
Yep. No, this relationship going to end the same way that it's always, and let's stop here.
Mhm.
Or it could be as simple as, I feel a lot better in my day when I drink water. Why am I choosing to
Yeah.
drink, soda and coffee all day when I know it doesn't make me feel good?
Mhm. So it's important to create those self boundaries,
Mm-hmm.
because if you can create self boundaries and abide by them, respect
Yeah.
your own boundaries, you
Yeah.
only make life better for yourself. Because
Yeah.
the one thing I always tell people, I can't control anybody outside of me. I'm
Yeah.
only in control of me and this space, small space around me.
Yeah.
And with that truth, it is important that I set the boundaries that works for me.
Yes.
Okay. And so I know how far I can go, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's eating too much,
Mhm.
all of these things that we do, whether it's not getting enough sleep, enough exercise,
Yeah.
whatever, because again, it benefits me. And one thing about human behavior is that if we don't somewhat, is that a better word?
Yeah.
Contain it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And we can go a little bit too far.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So setting those self boundaries are so imperative, even if you can't set them with other people's. That's what I mean by, those silent boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I've learned how not to answer the phone, not to return certain calls,
Mhm.
uh, know when to invite
Yes.
someone over, know when not to, right?
Mhm.
And I have no problem being Cinderella in certain crowds.
I love
Because
it.
if I know 30 crowds, after
Yeah.
20 minutes, somebody's going to do something stupid.
Mm-hmm.
By the time it gets 19 and a half minutes, I'm like, enjoy you, I'm out the door.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. No, but that means you've taken the time to understand yourself and listen to yourself so you can
Mhm.
practice setting those boundaries. And a big part of being able to set boundaries with ourselves is we have to listen and be honest with ourselves. And once we can do that, it makes it so much easier for us to know what our boundaries are, know what we need, know what our limits are and our expectations. And that builds a confidence where I can express them to others without guilt. So one
Mhm.
of the ways to help with setting boundaries in relationships and not feeling guilty is knowing yourself well enough to say, I know this works for me. I know this isn't rooted in being mean or being disrespectful or not trying to help. Like I know it's because this is truly my limit. And if I give from a space that I don't have, then it's not going to benefit the both of us.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
I agree. I totally agree. So earlier you mentioned I statements. Some people may not know what that is. Can you explain how they can use I statements to create those boundaries?
Sure. So are I statements are telling another person how you feel and how an action impacted you or how you perceived it. So you can say, I feel frustrated when you don't wash the dishes because it makes me seem like you don't value your time. We're not accusing. I'm not saying
Mhm.
you didn't wash the dishes and you're taking advantage of me and my time and you're just expecting me to wash the dishes all the time. No, we're staying neutral. I feel frustrated. It comes off in this way to me. So let's talk about this. Maybe we need to talk about how we need to use the dishwasher. Let's invest in one. Maybe on certain nights, can you wash the dishes after I've worked all day? Or maybe you cook and I'll wash the dishes, however it is. But I
Mhm.
statements, it starts off with I feel, insert your emotion, and then you
Mhm.
say what the person did and how you interpreted it.
Right, right. And it's important to realize that because this beautiful brain of ours is the way it activates, our brain interprets it when you go in with well, you did this
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't like it. It
Mm-hmm.
it, it interprets it as, well, you're blaming me, and so I'm gonna get defensive, right?
Exactly.
When you say I, the brain interprets it as I'm taking responsibility, but
Yes.
I'm also giving you some responsibility. And
Yeah.
so that's why those I statements are so important. And that is why people have to learn how to use them.
Yeah.
Uh,
Because it removes that assumption. We're
mhm,
assuming that the other person may felt X, Y, and Z, where the reality is, I don't know. In my experience, I like to tell myself and also clients, be curious. Create a space for curiosity instead of just automatically assuming that you know
Mhm.
why they decided to act in a certain
Mhm.
way. Difficult conversations, they can get a lot farther if we try to understand why someone felt that way instead of just assuming we already know why.
I love that. I love that because we don't live in somebody else's mind. We
No.
don't live in somebody else's thoughts, emotions, feelings.
Okay.
That's again those assumptions,
Mhm.
right? It's like they just floating in the air. All these assumptions.
For sure. And it's easy to grab one.
Yeah, and nobody's communicating it. I think that's something that we discussed too because that comes that those assumptions are what really affect relationships the most.
Yeah.
And remember, I say we live a life of relationships. So we're
Yeah.
just not talking about romantic
Mhm.
relationships. We're talking about with family,
Mhm.
with friends, coworkers,
Yeah.
neighbors, because we live a life of relationships. And when we have those assumptions without communicating them,
Yeah, it can definitely make us fall into a pit hole or pitfall if we're just
right,
kind of assuming what the other person is experiencing or thinking or meaning. Also, we never stop to say my own views skewed. We kind of just take our own
yeah,
reality as is and assume that we're right about how we're perceiving something. But if we grew up maybe in a household where certain things weren't normalized, maybe family yelled a lot. Maybe you had to be hyper vigilant because people would be silent around conflict. We can then take that skewed vision and project it onto somebody else and not really think, well, wait a minute, I have a different experience with conflict. Maybe their experience is a little bit more different. So let's be
mhm.
curious and ask the question instead of just assume.
Right, right. I love that. I love that. And that's why it's so important, though, for people to, get used to hearing themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because if you can listen to yourself, because I think everything starts with the self.
Yeah.
If you know how to respect your emotions, if you know how to respect your thoughts, feelings, concerns,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you start with you and learn how to respect that, then it becomes much easier to do that for other people.
Yeah.
Right? Because now you understand that, look, my emotions are valuable. My
Yes.
feelings, my thoughts are valuable. And you live in that space. And so now when you're interacting in these various relationships, you learn how now to respect somebody else's emotions.
Yeah.
I would say, right?
Yes.
Because we can still respect people's emotions, thoughts, and feelings and not agree.
Yes, for sure, for sure. No, but that's 100% correct. Once you kind of have an understanding of your own emotions, it makes it a lot easier to understand how I can be available to respect somebody else's. One of my favorite sayings that I probably say to myself daily is that no one else is coming. And not from a place of lack, but from a place of empowerment. No one can take the time to understand me deeper than I can understand myself. And in each relationship that I have, I am bringing myself. And it is my responsibility to understand myself so I can communicate that with others. And that creates the space so that I can understand others as well. No one else can do that work but me. So if I'm not doing it, I'm making it really hard for myself and kind of setting up others when it comes to relationships and boundaries.
Another morning, same old view. Got that feeling something's new. Time to get up on your feet. Feel that new and special beat. It's a brand new day, yeah. Gonna chase the clouds away. Find your light and let it shine. This moment's yours and it's your time.
So, Janelle, with
Yeah.
boundaries, okay?
Yeah.
We just talked about, we talked about I statements in the last segment, how important it is to use these I statements. And now I just want to ask you, how can boundary setting differ in family dynamics, especially in cultures where saying no feels like betrayal?
Yeah, that's a hard one, and I can definitely relate to that one. I've grown up in more of a collectivist culture family. My
Mhm.
family's Caribbean. We're from Trinidad and Tobago, and there is definitely a focus on the well-being of the group, which isn't a bad
Mhm.
thing. But
Mhm.
yes, it can feel that extra pressure to say no or to put yourself first in certain situations, maybe not even
Yeah.
saying no. So I think understanding how maybe saying no isn't just about letting the group down, because we can make it that black and white. If I say no
Mhm.
about this situation, it means I'm letting everybody else down. People will be negatively impacted. But sometimes it's not that catastrophic as we would make it out to be. Maybe it's
Right.
no, but I can provide support in a different way. Maybe it's no, not all the time, but I can schedule time to be here for support to help out. Maybe I put aside money, if that's a thing. I could put aside some money to help out with the family, but it doesn't have to be my whole paycheck. So things like that, to not make it so black and white, can help with setting boundaries in families and some of those closer relationships where it can feel like a betrayal if we say no.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I think too, just as people of African descent, because we're all taught on community as a whole. It's more about community and less about individualism, right?
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes we need to have this balance. Well, all the time we need to have balance, okay?
Yeah.
And knowing that it's okay to be there for the community, but it's also okay for me to find my own autonomy, right? And be able to say no without being guilty for it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that's a whole nother issue that we can talk about. Helping families understand that when someone sets a boundary with you, it's
Yeah.
not that there's a lack of love
Mm-hmm.
or they're betraying the family, the culture
Exactly.
there. Okay. It just means that now they're understanding that certain things have become too much for them. And I always say we share a percentage of DNA with our family.
That's true.
We share a percentage of DNA with our family.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, um, we're the only person, the only form that we have to live with for the rest of our lives.
Yeah.
10 years up the road, 20 years up the road, you're going to be with yourself. Guaranteed.
Always.
Okay. That is not guaranteed for anybody else in your life, regardless of how much you love them.
Yeah.
And because of that truth, it is important that you learn how to also love yourself. And boundaries help you do that in a safe way without putting up these walls.
Yeah.
And that's what I want to go back to these walls. Without putting up walls and cutting everybody off, and now you're just sitting there alone and you're not interacting with anybody. Because we're social beings. Like,
Yes.
whether we like it or not, we do need
It's
people.
important. Mm-hmm.
We do need people. We're social beings and we need people, but we need the right people. Can I just say that? We need the right people.
So important. We can almost stop right there. I feel like that's enough to resonate throughout the whole pack.
And that is key. So let's talk about that. That idea of the difference between setting boundaries and creating walls. Because some
Yeah.
people don't know the difference. Some people just go, nope, you either do it like this or you can just exit my life. Right?
Exactly.
And you can only exit so many people out your life.
Yeah. So
Setting
you will be alone. Because you're creating rigid boundaries, and
boundaries.
rigid boundaries usually are very inflexible and they're walls. We don't want to have just walls, a room of walls. We also want to have a door. So, and that's what
Mhm.
boundaries does. It regulates who comes in to a certain level and who stays outside. So being able to say, okay, yes, this person may not be the best with time. I'll put myself out there because I'm a very punctual person. I'm more of the person that's going to be probably 15 minutes early when I'm meeting up with a friend. But naturally, not everybody feels that way about time. And I've had to learn that that is okay. Not everybody sees that as disrespectful. They just see it as, they're more spontaneous. They see time in a different way. So with certain friends, instead of saying, sometimes the real time, I'll give them a later time because I know they're going to make it for that one. Or I understand if I get there early, I'm going to be waiting a little bit, or I'll have to just wait for them. And that's okay. But it would be unrealistic for me to im- blah. It would be unrealistic for me to enforce the boundary that everybody has to be at a certain place 15 minutes early, just like me.
Mhm.
It's not gonna be sustainable.
Right, right. I'm glad that you said it that way.
Mhm,
Okay.
mhm.
Rigid.
Yeah, we can be too rigid with
Yeah.
boundaries.
Yeah,
Mhm,
and that's key. We have to learn how to be flexible. I and sometimes when because I see that sometimes in behavior that is close to me, rigid behavior, and I struggle with it even as a therapist. When I see
mhm,
somebody who's rigid, I'm gonna be honest with you. Not so much with clients because they're my clients, right? but in personal relationships, I do.
mhm.
Because me, I'm like, how you so rigid and this brain of yours is moldable? Like,
Yeah,
how do you get this thing to be?
yeah, yeah.
But I also see too with that rigid mindset how that can be an issue in
Mhm,
relationships, right? It could definitely be an issue with relationships. Like, and I'm just gonna put it out there because sometimes I will share some of my business. So I'm good on boundaries, and it took me a long time to set boundaries, right?
mm,
Because again, I'm this African descendant person, and culture, community is everything.
yes.
And when I started setting boundaries and I started setting them after I realized that I was just becoming overwhelmed
Mm,
by people,
mhm,
with people, their requests and all
mhm.
of that. When I started setting them, I have this beautiful sister who's saying to me, "You just so mean. You don't love you."
Mhm,
Sitting there and going, "You are so dramatic. It ain't
mhm.
that serious." All
Yeah.
I'm
Oh, we're
saying,
human.
yeah.
We are human.
And it took forever for me to get her to understand that no, sweetie, you have to have these boundaries. And eventually, if you don't, resentment is going to build. And it's because
Mhm,
I love you,
mhm.
I'm setting these boundaries, right?
Yeah,
It's because I love you, I'm saying, no, stop here. You're
yeah.
doing too much,
Mhm.
right? I need you not to go this far.
Yeah, yeah.
Eventually, she got it, and now she calls her baby sister and go, "Girl, you taught me something."
Yeah.
Right?
How about that?
But I think it's important too for us to understand that, for families to understand that just because you have these boundaries, it does not say I don't love you.
Yeah,
What it's
yeah,
saying is that no, I love me too.
exactly.
And I'm not willing to overextend myself,
Mhm.
which is okay. Now
Yeah.
the question is, because I hear it, because can I say too, I am a born and raised church girl,
Mm,
right?
yes.
Raised in the church, and I
Mhm,
just heard the little voices. We all got these little conditioned voices. Now
mhm.
you say people, but what do you mean? Because you got to be there for people. That ain't even Bible.
Yes.
God want me to
Yeah.
start talking about Bible, right?
Mhm,
Okay.
mhm.
So how do you make sure, even spiritually, in religious communities, how do we set these boundaries? Because they need to be set in religious communities too. Can I be
Mhm.
honest with it?
Yeah, that's so true. And you know what? There are natural boundaries that kind of already exist, you know? When we think of night and day, like,
Mhm.
there's a boundary there. When we think about thoughts together, when we think of not just night and day, but also different situations where boundaries kind of naturally exist. A fish isn't going to be on land. Why? Because it's not going to survive there. So boundaries already naturally exist in the world. And seeing it, especially, I grew up in the church too, it could feel like we have to give everything and be everything. And if we don't, that it's selfishness. But it's nowhere that said I had to give to the point of my own detriment. That is
Mhm.
nowhere in sight. And sometimes
Mhm.
it can feel that if I don't give everything, that I'm entering this space of ungodliness. And that's
Mhm.
not true because God can exist where boundaries are as well.
Yeah. Yes, I
Mhm,
love that you said that.
mhm.
I have these conversations with people all the time, and sometimes I have to pull up scripture and I'm like, you tell me where this is in the Bible that you can create boundaries.
Yeah,
Because I do believe there's a scripture that says, guard your heart,
yeah.
right?
Mhm, mhm.
Because out of it flows the river of
Yeah,
life, right?
yeah,
Guarding your heart is a boundary. Can we
it
just say
is. That is a boundary.
yes? And so, when we talk about boundaries, sometimes it can be critiqued, specifically in spiritual settings. And it's important to know that you have to create those boundaries. You're
Mhm.
creating them because, again, we do have these emotions and
Mhm.
feelings.
Yeah.
And if you pull on them a little bit too long, wrong way, they're going to respond.
Yeah,
And they don't always respond in the nicest of ways.
for
Okay.
sure. For sure.
And so it's important to understand that.
Yeah. And I think something that would be important for people to know when they are setting boundaries is that not everybody has to agree.
Mm,
Sometimes we feel like if I explain it well enough, if I take enough time, if I break it down, if I'm patient, that one day they will be able to understand and accept said boundary. And that is not a requirement for a boundary to be enforced.
mhm. Yeah,
Mhm,
totally. I love
mhm,
it. I
mhm.
love that. I love that because nobody has to agree, right? You the one that have to live with it. You're the
That's right.
only that need. Yeah.
Exactly. And, not everybody is going to agree. I think that's
Exactly.
important to understand as well. When we start setting boundaries, going back to say we want the right people in our lives.
Mhm.
Boundaries
Right.
help regulate who are the right people and who are the wrong people that we need in
Right.
our lives. So
Right.
be prepared for a little bit of shakeup in maybe your social
Mhm.
circles when you start realizing what your true needs are and expressing that to others.
Yeah, yeah, because when you get the right people in your life and you set those boundaries, oh, they're right there with you. Why? Because
Yeah,
they have boundaries too.
exactly.
And they want you to respect theirs. And you both living good with, your boundaries,
Okay.
their boundaries, and you're
Hmm.
respecting each other and you can live
Yeah.
life so happy.
Yeah. Yeah, so often boundaries kind of have this rap as, it's so rigid or isolating, like I'm putting myself in this little container, but boundaries is a space of liberation. It's saying this
Mhm.
is where I can exist and feel free, my authentic self, and, things are healthy for me. And when I try to push myself beyond my boundaries, this is the space where some negative things tend to happen to me. Maybe I'm not functioning as well, maybe I get sick, maybe my relationships aren't as fulfilling. So instead of seeing boundaries as it's a limitation, it doesn't allow me to do everything I want to do. We allow ourselves to see it as a space where, okay, this is where freedom exists for me.
Right, right.
Mhm.
I love that. I love that because the absence of boundaries, and I've seen it, I've done it myself years ago. No more, thank God. But I've seen it myself. The absence of boundaries, even in those days when you don't feel your best, you're sick, you're still trying to be there for other people.
Yeah,
And in the long run, you're wearing your own self out.
yeah.
You're trying to be there feeling like, no, but I have to be there because I'm their friend. I'm the family
Mhm.
member. If I don't, then
Yep.
they don't, they're going to judge me
Yeah.
negative.
Mhm.
And here you are, you know, about to drop, but you're
Yeah.
still going to put yourself to be there for somebody else. That's why boundaries are so important. What I'm hearing in my mind, because there used to be an old saying that says boundaries are where um, you stop, I begin, where you stop where
Mhm.
I begin and you stop, literally.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay. And that's all it is. It's saying, look, at some point, there's going to be a drawing line here. I'm going to be able to go with you, but oh, so far. And then I'm going to have to stop and you have to finish this thing by yourself. All right.
Yep.
So I'm not saying I'm abandoning you. It's just like, I can't go all the way with you. No, at some point, I'm going to have
Mhm.
to draw the line and say, I can only go this far. And the rest of it,
Mhm.
you can take that by yourself. I'm not willing to go that far with you. You'll
Yeah.
love it, but I'm not willing to go that far with
Yeah, because then if we're not listening to ourselves and we're continuing to push ourselves further and further, and then we reach our limit and then we get upset, and then we look around and say, well, I would have wanted you to do this for me. We create this, again, that unspoken expectation. Well, I went this far with that person
you.
and I crossed my boundaries to this point. So I'm
Mhm.
almost expecting them to do that for me. And then when people turn around and say those famous words, I didn't ask you to, we get upset. We get angry because I crossed this boundary. I didn't want to do this, but I still showed up. And you know what? They're
Mhm.
right. They didn't ask you to do
They
that, to
didn't
cross
ask
your
you to.
boundaries. So now
Yeah.
we have to hold ourselves accountable and say,
Mhm.
okay, so what's going to be my next move here?
Yeah, yeah. I want to just turn just a little bit and talk
Mhm.
about since both you and I are in this mental health field, why is it so important that therapists, social workers create boundaries with their clients?
Ooh, that is so important because it creates an agreement where we're both on the same page about the nature of the relationship. When there is no clear definition of what the expectations are, it can lead to a situation where, there can be malpractice issues, ethical issues, or I'm maybe not clear on treatment plan. And a simple boundary is, okay, office hours are this time to this time. If it's the weekend, I'm not going to be available. If I don't clearly communicate that or I'm crossing my own boundaries, I could set my client up for a situation where they could be expecting for me to respond and waiting for me to respond, and I'm not. And that creates a bigger problem for everyone involved. So
Yeah.
having boundaries are important, especially in that relationship, because it helps create clear expectations and guidelines about where the relationship is going, what I can help with, what I can't help with.
And that keeps you from forming dependencies, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't
Mm-hmm.
want the client to be dependent upon,
No,
right?
no.
There is a job here, right? And
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes I tell people, because I know, some clients you have with you forever. And I'm sorry, but I'm one of those therapists, unlike a lot of therapists. I
Mm-hmm.
just believe that mental health should be one of those checkup things that we do every year. You know how the same way we have
Mm-hmm.
physical checkups. I think we can do that same thing. You need to check up,
Mm-hmm.
check your mental, you
Yeah,
know,
like how are things
your
going?
yeah. And so I don't mind clients that say, no, girl, you're going to be with me until we both get old. Right. And I may not see a person like but once or once a month, every other month.
Yeah.
That's okay with me. Why? Because I understand life and I understand that the same thing that you came to see me with, as you start to go through this life, something going to change and you're going to need to come back to me. Right.
Exactly.
Right.
That is life.
And yeah, that is life. Exactly. But I think if we create those boundaries too, I know for a fact if we create those boundaries, what we do is we don't build dependency. And
Yeah.
so my reason for saying that is sometimes you can have people who've been with you for so long, it almost feels like, girl, you my best friend. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to go, but no, I'm your therapist, not the
Exactly.
best friend.
Exactly. I'm glad I created a therapeutic relationship where you feel very
Yeah.
comfortable with me. Yes, at the end of the day, I am still your therapist.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. So creating boundaries are needful. Is the reason
Mhm.
why we create them in the helping field. Doctors create them with their patients,
Yeah.
because there is a need for them. Because again, if you don't create them, human behavior says, if you don't set a line for me, I'm gonna go as far as you gonna let me. Right.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Yep.
And so it's important to do that. So Janelle, we talked about this on the break.
Yeah.
I want you to tell me, let me make sure I didn't forget anything about these boundaries before we go to your practice. You're going to need to explain to me what is Reiki,
Of
okay?
course.
Because I need to know what it is and what you do with this energy work. And I'm sure other people want to know too. So
Yeah.
my last question, there was a question I wanted to ask you. My last question is,
Okay.
why do people pleasers or trauma survivors often have difficulties creating boundaries?
And that's such a good question because a lot of people get frustrated at themselves on why can't they create healthy boundaries, especially when, mental health has definitely popped up in the social media space and we're hearing set boundaries and people are making it seem like it's just a very easy thing to do. And it can be very distressing to a person who is a people pleaser or a trauma survivor. And a lot of times when it's difficult like that, I ask clients to kind of look at what are the roots of this boundary? What is feeding it? What is making it so strong that it makes it feel unsafe, maybe to let it go? So, boundaries, if we have a history of maybe trauma, if we have a history of maybe bullying, if we have a history of being abused in relationships, asserting a boundary does not feel safe at all. It is feels like a very dangerous thing. And our brain is wired to keep us safe, not happy. That is the focus of the brain. It wants to keep us safe. I'm feeling anxiety, I'm feeling fear. So if I'm just quiet and I tolerate this boundary violation, I'll be safer than if I speak up and say, I'm not okay with this. So that gives a little bit of insight why it feels so uncomfortable for people pleasers, trauma survivors, because it feels like I am sacrificing a relationship. It feels like I could be abandoned. It feels like I could be hurt in extreme situations, it feels like I could be rejected. And that feels
Mhm.
very distressing to me. So if someone's struggling with that, it's being patient with yourself because it is not as easy as social media would like other people to think on learning how to set boundaries with others,
No, not when trauma is involved.
especially.
Oftentimes, when with trauma, they're stuck in the back of this brain here,
Mhm.
that fight, freeze mode, right?
Yes.
Stuck, and you don't feel safe,
Yeah.
right? Glad you say that because they're struggling with feeling safe. How do I advocate for myself when I don't feel safe doing so? And often, what
Yeah.
trauma does is it takes a sense of control away from,
It does.
right? So if that sense of control was taken away from you through a traumatic event, you're trying to, it's like, okay, how do I get beyond this? Because the last
Mhm.
time I tried to say no, when the last time I tried,
Mhm.
and so you just kind of feel trapped. And
Mhm.
it's just the way that this beautiful brain works to keep us
Yeah.
safe.
Yeah. Yeah, for
So
sure.
I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you for that. Okay,
Yeah.
so now let's go with this practice of yours. Tell me what this Reiki is so I can understand it.
Sure. And I love talking about Reiki. So Reiki is a form of energy healing. Reiki is a Japanese word for universal life energy. So the
Mhm.
focus of Reiki is the practitioner opens itself up to energy to help people heal. I like to say it is not something where it's a one size fits all. When I tell my clients who want to try Reiki, it's not that you should stop seeing your doctor. It's not that you should stop seeing your therapist. It's a complementary modality. So what I'm looking at when I provide Reiki is the human energy field. So a lot of times when we're talking about trauma, for example, we can have those very strong emotions that come up, and emotions are energy.
Mhm.
So, what Reiki does is kind of go to that space, whether I'm focusing on the mind and just kind of provide a little bit of ease, a little bit of rest in that space.
I love that. I love that. And how do you practice that, by the way?
So I practice Reiki. It is hands off, so I don't need to be in a room with the person or I don't need to touch the person. I like to compare it to Wi-Fi. You don't need to be
Mhm.
next to your router or your phone doesn't need to be connected to the router for it to work. I kind of just need to know where you are. And once I usually guide my clients through a meditation so they can relax. And then once they're guided into the meditation and relaxing, then I can take a look energetically. And what that feels like for me is certain areas may feel a bit more dense. So,
Mhm.
say you're feeling grief from a loss, I may notice around the heart chakra that it may
Mhm.
feel a little bit more dense. Most recently, I went to a maternal mental health event and I was noticing a lot of pressure around the hips with the women that I was working with, and they were pregnant. So I felt more dense energy around there. It's one of those things where it's easier to experience than to explain, but
Right.
what I'm essentially looking at energetically is where I'm feeling certain energy, maybe certain cords to past situations or people, and kind of removing it, which makes it easier for the person to move forward in their own healing journey.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. As you were talking, I was thinking about, because we're all made up of energy, of course,
Yeah.
right? We all have molecules,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Throughout the body. And oftentimes we can go around certain people and we can feel their energy.
Oh,
If,
yes.
if their stress is like,
Mhm.
girl, what's going on with you?
Yeah, like
Like,
you come in here, you brought all this energy. Like, what's happening?
so I
Mhm.
love that practice. Good.
Mhm.
And a lot of people are into chakra is the name,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
A lot of people are into that and being able to help with that energy too. It definitely helps people.
Mhm.
Okay. As you were talking, I'm kind of I was somewhat reminded of um when your part works.
Yes.
I
Mhm.
was IFS. And
Mhm.
I was kind of I'm reminded of that because that is an energy form in itself,
Yeah.
because when you're having people go back and talk to different parts that's
Mhm.
causing these things, these
Yeah.
feelings around them, then they have
Mhm.
to communicate with these parts to help them out. So
Mhm.
I really like that. Good for
Yeah.
you.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's been an amazing experience and being able to help clients with maybe revisiting some trauma or issues or past events that have made them feel a bit stuck and providing energy in a way where it helps them to kind of like the body to exhale a little bit. Like we can
Mhm.
let this go now and we don't need to hold on to it anymore.
Okay.
Mhm.
I'm curious, how do you introduce that to a client? Because I know even when I talk to clients about IFS and talking to clients, they
Yeah.
look at me like, you want
Mm,
me to talk to myself?
yeah.
Talk to myself?
Yeah.
Like, I know it sounds strange, but it works. And then they try it and it's like, well, that was
Mhm.
interesting.
So I like to connect it to something that most people have experience with already. So if I talk about mindfulness and meditation and sometimes some of the rest that you can feel after a meditation, they're like, okay, that makes a little bit of sense. Usually I have to kind of course, bite-sized piece it and to say things that obviously most people have experience with. Have you ever walked into a room and felt like the energy was off? Most
Mm,
people can say, I've walked into a room and felt like the energy was off, or I was around this person and it was something about them that I didn't really trust. And then it turned up later that, yeah, I shouldn't trust
mhm.
them. So we're feeling energy, whether we're calling it that or not. So once I kind of talk about those situations, it helps them to better be open to energy work.
Okay. I love that. All right. So, Janelle, we're at the end of this segment. But as you know, I want you to come back to the show,
Yeah.
talk to us about some other things, right? We're
Yeah.
going to keep in touch and make that happen because this is the space for professionals,
Hmm.
specifically individuals, to come and let's just talk about different areas around our wellness. I just hate to just say mental health
Yeah.
because sometimes we put so much focus on mental health, physiological health, and to people just think, they're not connected.
Nope. It's all connected.
It's all connected. And we have to have these conversations around wellness and how we can improve our overall wellness,
Hmm.
with this beautiful form that we have in this body. And
Yeah.
so I want to welcome you back to come and have more conversations with me around this, to have different conversations to help people understand the connection
Yeah.
with their experiences, different things to care about, their overall wellness.
Mhm.
But before we end, can you please tell the viewers, the listeners, how can they find you and where you're located?
So I am located in Maryland. I'm licensed in Maryland and DC. You can find me online at www.alchemy-therapy.com or on Instagram at Alchemy Therapy LL.
Okay. And her information will also be on Intake's website.
Okay.
So if you forget that, I got you. I got you. I'll make sure it's on the website so you can find her. Okay. Again, Janelle, thank you for having this conversation with
Yeah.
me. I appreciate it so very much. And thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. But until we come back next week, as we always do come back, I want you to continue to talk about mental health and how to make yours a priority. A great one. If you are a professional or someone with a story and would like to be a guest on the show, go to our website, intaketalkshow.com, and complete the form to be a guest. Perhaps you are someone with a question or comment that you would like addressed on the show. Again, go to our website, intaketalkshow.com, and complete the contact form. I hope to see you soon. And remember to continue to talk about mental health and how to make yours a priority.
This wraps up our conversation with Janelle. Did you enjoy this episode? We'd love to hear from you. Share your comments, questions, and reflections on our YouTube channel, Facebook page, or your favorite podcast platform. Join us next week as we discuss sweeping it under the rug with two special guests, licensed family therapist Marae Crockett and certified trauma healing professional Alexandra Roa. Thanks for watching.